Welcome to Restaurant Canada's webinar, Understanding the Millennial Workforce. My name is Chris Elliott, Senior Economist at Restaurants Canada, and I'm your moderator. In recent months, we've seen a steady increase in labor shortages in the restaurant industry. Operators are also facing an increasing challenge of retaining and recruiting staff. Given that millennials will comprise 75% of the workforce within the next 10 years, it's critically important to understand this cohort. So in this webinar, you will gain insights on how you can recruit and retain a millennial workforce in your organization, how to understand and motivate this group of young workers to achieve shared success, and how to leverage your millennial employees to build your business. It is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's session, Dean of the School of Hospitality, Tourism, and Culinary Arts at Centennial College. Joe Baker is known for his commitment to service excellence, innovative programs, and collaborative partnerships. Having previously led dynamic teams within organizations such as George Brown College's Center for Hospitality and Culinary Arts, Oliver and Bonacini Restaurants, and Keg Restaurants, Joe's passion for preparing highly skilled graduates to launch careers in the hospitality and tourism industry burns brightly. With a Master of Education in Higher Education Leadership and a Bachelor of Commerce in Hospitality and Tourism Management, Joe is uniquely positioned to serve as a modern higher education leader with a keen appreciation for the needs of the hospitality and tourism industry. So thank you so much, Joe, for being here today. Also in the room with us is James Rylett, Vice President of Central Canada from Restaurants Canada, who will help me with the Q&A session. So before we get started, you can submit questions by typing into the questions area of the control panel. You may send your question anytime during the presentation. Today's webinar will also be recorded and will be made available in a few days, and participants will be sent a link to the webpage. Finally, if you'd like to follow along on Twitter, we are live tweeting today's webinar using hashtag #RestaurantTips. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Joe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. What I've done today is try to put together a presentation containing some of the most current research about the millennial workforce in the hospitality industry, as well as a little bit of insight in terms of how we can tackle some very difficult problems with some actual design thinking processes that will really help us work through these challenges so that we can ultimately implement some really innovative and creative solutions. Look forward to sharing some of my insights with you, and let's get right started. So when I tend to do these types of presentations, I think it's really important to start with the why. Why are we here today? And as previously mentioned, this is a pretty staggering statistic. By 2020, millennials are projected to be 50% of the workforce. And by 2025, this number is expected to reach 75%. That means that this is a very significant segment of our society that is entering a workforce that is already a little bit challenged when it comes to a labor supply. So we do need to wrap our heads around who these workers are, and ultimately the intent of this workshop is really to be able to figure out how we can motivate them and leverage them to continue the success of your businesses. So let's start with a little bit of definition. What is a millennial? Now, this is not an exact science. Various demographers have different date ranges, but it is generally accepted that millennials were born between 1981 and 2000. So this is complete data from Statistics Canada and Environics research from 2015. In 2015, this group was 15 to 34. So flash forward a few years later, you can see they're about in the 18 to 37-year-old range. That's interesting to know, especially as this industry employs so many youth. Now, look at that population in 2015. 9.5 million millennials in Canada. They are the same size as the boomers. Pretty significant. At this point, about 27% of the population, but what's most significant there is 37% of the labor force. There are more millennials in the labor force right now than any other generation in Canada. And as we were discussing earlier, that's only headed for growth. So very important piece of information for us to wrap our heads around. So what about me? How do I know about millennials? As mentioned, I am the proud dean of the School of Hospitality, Tourism, and Culinary Arts at Centennial College. Over the last few years, we've undergone some pretty significant revitalization. This is a picture of my beautiful school, just opened up last September and houses all kinds of different aspects of our industry training programs. So we have culinary, baking, hospitality, food and beverage, hotel management, lots of different programs. There's something unique about my school though, something that's in the DNA. This is our restaurant called the Local Cafe and Restaurant. So while I pride myself on being an educator, I'm also a quasi-operator. This is our culinary team. You can see lots of youthful millennial faces there. Our restaurant is open 7 days a week, which is quite unique from a hospitality school perspective. We have a full service dining room and then also a quick service cafe because the intention is to prepare our students to hit the ground running when they enter the workforce. And again, we also have a 20,000 square foot event center. So we do lots of high volume events, meetings, conferences, and weddings, and that sort of thing. And this is my restaurant and events team. Again, they're taking a lovely selfie on our balcony. But the whole point of this is understanding the millennial workforce means working with them and gaining some insights being face-to-face. Between our students and our team, it's been a really insightful few years in terms of understanding exactly who these people are. Now here's a glimpse, and this is important because these folks are coming your way. There are 2,000 students in my school right now. I call them workers in training, and this is a graph that shows you only about 4% of them are over 35. So you can do the math there of 2,000 students a year studying to enter this industry. A lot of them are already in the millennial workforce, or in the millennial date range. So my perspective on who they are is just an insight in terms of who they will be when they eventually join the ranks of the industry and become members of your workforce. So what will we be talking about today? I've broken down my presentation into 4 different sections. First of all, defining what the problem is, understanding a little bit about who these people are, looking at framing and developing a solution, and then ultimately trying to bring it all together for you in terms of where we go from here. So let's get right into it. What is the problem here? Well, as mentioned, by about 2035, we're looking at a shortfall of about 240,000 tourism jobs in Canada due to labor shortages. This comes from work out of Tourism HR Canada, who does a lot of research on labor market information. And of course, the food and beverage industry alone could see more than 100,000 jobs go unfilled. This is a significant problem and one you're likely facing already as you struggle to find qualified, skilled workers to sustain your businesses. So understanding that the millennials make up a significant segment of the workforce and understanding that we're actually facing a labor shortfall means that we have a problem on our hands and we need to do everything we can do to leverage this group so that you can continue success. The food and beverage services industry is the largest employer among tourism businesses, accounting for 55% of all tourism jobs in Canada. And, no surprise, again, tourism provides significant employment for young people. The 2011 National Household Survey showed that 32% of Canada's tourism workforce was 15 to 24, right in the date range of our millennials. So, who are these people? Let's get to understanding a little bit about them. Millennials cannot be lumped into a single group defined by their age or by other demographic characteristics such as gender, region, or socioeconomic status. They are a diverse part of Canadian society made up of 6 social value tribes, each reflecting a distinct worldview and approach to life. This sentiment comes from Environics research, a really significant piece of research and report that was put together called Meet the Millennials. And this is really actually a unique tool because in terms of identifying the different groups, Environics sees that there are 6 different groups within this millennial generation. Now you're looking at these and trying to get a sense of exactly who they are. I will make sure that you have access to this research tool so that you can actually go and spend a little bit of time understanding who each group is. I don't want to spend too much time digging into this because you can really get lost in terms of all the priorities of each different group. But what's important to understand here from an operator perspective is it's difficult to generalize about millennials because they are so diverse. This website actually has a really cool tool. There's a quiz that maybe you could use with your teams, with your managers, and with your staff in terms of understanding which tribe your millennials relate to. And again, that just gives you some insight into what motivates them and how you can ultimately help them be successful while achieving your business goals. One thing that is common across millennials, and we hear this a lot in the research, is this concept of social values. Now again, each one of these 6 subsets has a different set of values. But if you spend some time reflecting on these values and understanding your workers, especially if you can really get into that Environics tool and find out who's working for you, you can see some common themes. And you're probably experiencing these already, and you've certainly heard about them. What's important to millennials? Well, being respected, being valued, being connected to community, being open-minded, learning from others, having a meaningful career. There are some real commonalities here. And as you are working with this group, it's important to understand that social values are very high on their radar. So that means that needs to be integrated into the environment that you're creating for them to work in. Okay, so we understand there's a labor shortage, and we understand that the millennials are a significant segment of the workforce. And they are challenging to understand because they are certainly different from previous generations. And we're trying to put together some strategies in terms of how we can motivate them, leverage them so that our businesses can continue to be successful. And so I want to introduce you to a concept called design thinking. And the reason that I thought I would use this is that we are trying to build a solution. Building a solution that addresses a gap, addresses a challenge. Now, design thinking is traditionally used when people are at the center of your challenge. So you may face some technical challenges in your businesses, could be related to equipment or accounting or finance, and maybe some rational decision-making process there works. But considering that this is a unique set of circumstances and requires us to understand the people at the center of this challenge, I thought that it would actually help us guide our conversation today. And so I'll talk to you a little bit about design thinking, and then we'll get right into it. So, as mentioned, design thinking is a creative, human-centric process for generating meaningful and useful solutions. It's a real common sense approach to solving problems. It focuses on people's needs, wants, and goals to come up with creative and innovative solutions to problems. In business, design thinking is often associated with competitive advantages, something that I know is important and valuable to you as operators. This comes from a great piece written by One Extra Pixel, just in terms of how to use design thinking to solve problems. So we will be actually using their framework to guide us through solving our problem. Has 6 unique steps, and again, this will help us move through the challenges that we're faced, and we'll go through each step and apply it to our millennial challenge. So step 1, empathize. What does this mean? To empathize means to research the people you're trying to help, the people you're trying to solve the problem for. In your research, you'll need to develop knowledge about what these people do, say, want, think, or feel. That's how you'll be able to empathize with them. I've done a little bit of the research in terms of pulling this together for you and framed it from a millennial perspective. But this is a very key step because we really do need to understand what they do, what they say, what they want, what they think, and what they feel. Okay, let's get into it. What millennials most want out of work and their career is a good balance between work and their personal life, followed by financial security, wealth generation, and flexibility on the job. Making an important contribution to society is of strong importance to most millennials based on their social values. Again, coming from this great Environics study. Now, I'm sure you're looking at that right now saying, that's a lot to ask, and quite frankly it is. Doesn't mean we have to deliver everything, but it's really important to understand what they want out of work and meet them where their needs are as much as possible. So can we offer all of those things? In an ideal world, sure, but not in every single case. Can we at least focus on some of the things that we can contribute to? Yes, I believe so. Flexibility on the job, contribution to society, financial security, wealth generation, building careers that start with jobs. I wanted to share a quote with you from Bruce Lawson, who's the president of the Counseling Foundation of Canada, who worked with Environics to put this together, because I think there's something really tangible here for us. Bruce believes that 96% of millennials define having a steady job as the primary marker of adulthood, far more than owning a home, getting married, or having children, which were key markers for previous generations. This underscores the need for career development to ensure millennials have the skills, confidence, and adaptability to navigate the ever-shifting economy. I believe this is something that we can deliver on. There is no shortage of jobs in this industry. Having a steady job that ultimately leads to careers is something that we can absolutely put together for them, and something that I think is a real priority. Certainly is for me as the Dean of a hospitality school, and it certainly is for Restaurants Canada in terms of promoting careers in this great industry. Okay, so we have empathized a little with our group. Now we're moving into defining what our problem is. So, what you are aiming to define are the unmet needs of your users, our millennials. Take a look at the research insights you've gathered and take a look at your problem at hand. Next, look carefully to figure out what isn't overlapping here. What areas can be improved upon within your problem or scenario to meet the expectations of the people you're trying to help. You're looking for missed opportunities to address. The millennial employee is interested in feedback. Once again, this won't come to a surprise to any of you who are working with millennials right now. They want feedback on their own performance. However, traditional semi-annual reviews are too infrequent for millennials. They want to know they've done a good job, and they want to know now. This comes from a great piece of research done by the Ivy Business School. Not only are the timing and frequency important, but so too is the way in which feedback is framed and delivered. Whether positive or negative, feedback needs to be structured in a way that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Feedback needs to be clear and specific to be effective. Now, this is a new generation of workers entering our industry, and there are some new management theories and leadership theories that support this group. But some classics are just as relevant today as they have been. I'm not sure if you spend any time reading the 1 Minute Manager. Certainly, a lot of my mentors along my career are grinning right now that I'm promoting this to you, but there are updates to these kinds of books. You could pick this up on Amazon, probably no more than $10 or $15, and it's a short, quick read, and really frames a process that you can set 1-minute goals, give 1-minute praise for positive behavior, and 1-minute redirect for behavior that doesn't support the things that you want to achieve in your organization. And becoming 1-minute managers is really critical in terms of delivering on-the-spot feedback to the millennial group. And again, that feedback doesn't have to be glowing and positive. It can be positive when it accounts for it, and constructive when that needs to happen as well. I think this is a really critical piece in terms of managing this millennial workforce. Okay. Moving on to step 3 of our design thinking process. We're going to ideate here. The third step is where creativity starts to come in. Creativity and ideation can merely mean brainstorming and thinking outside the box. Now, creativity doesn't mean you need to be an artist. You just have to let loose with some possible solutions. Don't hold anything back here. Go as wild and crazy as possible. Mix and match your ideas with your coworkers. Build on top of one another's idea. Go nuts. Have fun. Your job here is to come up with as many creative ideas as possible related to this millennial workforce and how you can recruit them, retain them, and really have them contribute to the success of your business. All right, so this is from QSR Magazine, directly related to the millennials in the workforce. Excuse me, this piece comes out of the US. Millennial priorities may have universal appeal, but knowing how to retain young workers is far from common knowledge. Restaurants can't easily offer the Facebook or Google game and snack room culture that a tech company can, and those kinds of perks only work when they arise from real relationships anyway. Younger workers' high bar for technology can also incentivize a restaurant to update its digital side. The technologies that millennials have at home is often far superior from the technology they have when they go to work. It could be harder for superiors to engage with younger employees without the technology they feel comfortable using. Now, what does this mean? This doesn't mean that we all have to run out and invest heavily in technology. Quite frankly, some of us don't have the resources to do that. And if you do, then that's probably a bigger piece of your strategy. However, what's important to understand here is that the millennials have the technology that they're comfortable with in their pockets, at their disposal. We were doing some research when we were building our school in terms of connecting with our AV consultants and designers, and there's a very unique statistic that they use, which right now, the average consumer needs power and Wi-Fi to support 2.6 personal devices. Laptop, phone, watch, tablet, any one of those things. But the point here is that your millennials are comfortable with this technology already. We're trying to come up with ideas in terms of leveraging them to help them grow your business. Meet them where they're at in terms of their comfort with technology and see what they can do to contribute to your overall success. Speaking of, moving on to step 4 of our design thinking process, this is all about prototyping. The purpose of prototyping is to get feedback on which part of your ideas work, which needs improvement, and which won't work for your problem at all. You're going to have to create actual prototypes as some of your brainstorm solutions from the ideation step. So keep that technology piece in the back of your mind. I was looking for research on Millennial and actually came across an interesting piece in Menu magazine. And the piece that was written is actually about consumers in general. So younger consumers, just like your younger millennial employees, are highly connected and they value communication in the moment. In case you are annoyed by customers who take and post Instagram photos, or even annoyed by your millennial workers constantly staring at their phones, think of them as free and instantaneous advertising. Now, as business operators, you already understand your target market and you've designed ambiance, menus, and service around that group. Now it's time to leverage your millennial team to make it come to life. Remember, we're prototyping here, knowing that our millennial workforce is comfortable with technology, highly connected, and value communications in the moment. I want to share with you an example of something that we did. So last September, we opened our restaurant and cafe and our event center. And when we opened and we began our processes, we had our social media accounts controlled by a central marketing department. And at the beginning, it was great. We got our brand positioning out there. We got our logos all straightened. But there was something that was unique in that our social media wasn't really adding value to our business. It wasn't drawing in any new guests. And that wasn't really a surprise when we pulled back and looked at it, because when we were controlling those social media accounts, they were controlled by a bit of a central marketing regime, which is really important to our larger brand, but doesn't allow for some of the playfulness and fun in terms of connecting to our target audience. So eventually, as we rolled on, we took an opportunity to engage with the millennial team that runs our restaurant and event center. And we actually gave them free reign of our social media accounts, especially Instagram. Now, yes, I have to admit, it was a little bit scary at the beginning to hand over the reins, but with some coaching and some guidance They really understood what's important to our brand. This is just a snapshot of some of the most recent things that we're doing. And as you can see, it matches with what's important to us. The images are bright, they're colorful, they're catchy, they're youthful. The people in the photographs are young. The people in the photographs are engaging in the food and beverage service environment that we provide. Our brand is clearly present, although it's not heavy-handed and over the top. And all I'm saying here is there's an opportunity to play around, understanding that the millennials have the technology in their pockets, they have the confidence and the awareness and the connection on social media, and an understanding of how to connect to your consumer base. Just an idea here that lets you give them a little bit of collaboration in terms of being engaged and involved in your marketing strategy. It certainly worked for us. We've seen a significant increase in the traffic on our social media accounts, and I think it actually is coming across much more authentically when it comes to relating to our brand itself, which is very youthful and energetic from the inside. Okay, moving along to step 5. We're getting to the testing phase now. Once you have a few prototypes fleshed out, test them with your target audience. Go back to the people you're trying to help and get their feedback. You want to know whether your proposed solution is meeting their needs, wants, and goals. And again, this is relating to engaging the millennial workforce to contribute to the success of your business. What does this mean? Well, let's be honest. Fast Company here gives us some pretty unique insights and states something obvious that might actually be in the back of your head as we're working through this presentation. A common critique of millennials in the workplace is that they are impatient, entitled, and not willing to put in the time and hard work needed to succeed. Delayed gratification doesn't apply to millennials. They want change, and they want it to happen fast. Now, what's important here is that this doesn't mean that millennials aren't hard workers. On the contrary, they will work hard when you get serious about investing in their skills development. And this is about understanding who they are. Young talent wants the opportunity to learn from someone with expertise. They want that on-the-ground experience to happen today, not tomorrow, and certainly not in 5 years. I must share with you that I believe that one of the most important aspects of developing a relationship with the millennial workforce is understanding that they want to learn from you. When we talk about skills development, when we talk about training, it doesn't have to be big, heavy-handed tuition reimbursement, professional development policies and processes. Although again, if you're in an organization that can support that kind of initiative, of course it's positive. But skill development, training, learning can just mean time spent with you as the expert, sharing with them that on-the-ground experience. And this is about developing a relationship with them and testing out some of the ideas that you have shaped together. We're moving right along to the final step in our design thinking process: implement. Here we are into the final step. Once you're satisfied with the quality of your solution, make it happen to make it real. You will need to make sure that the solution is implemented for its intended audience. You know, remember the people that you're trying to help, the millennials? This is really key in terms of sustainability. Lots of unique ideas here, lots of background understanding who they are, but how are we going to implement these ideas into our culture so that they're sustainable and we can have continued and shared success? So I wanted to share something with you that came from Fortune, which is a really interesting insight. Millennials have gotten a bad rap across the board, from parents, bosses, and society in general. Contrary to everything you've read on the internet, there are plenty of reasons to cheer them on, and a few ways to attract them to your company. Millennials are transparent in their need for instant feedback. You've heard that from me a few times, and again, if you're working with them, you already understand this. They grew up in the digital age, leading lives that are far more public than any generation before. This has huge implications for the way they work and the tools they use. They communicate with a sense of openness, and this is about implementation into your culture. You're going to have to come to terms with the fact that they want you to share with them, and they want to share with you. Openness, again, does not mean that everything has to be positive. You can share the successes in your organization. You can also share the challenges, as you will have that with them from a relationship perspective. You can share your goals, your expectations, your intentions for them in terms of engaging with you and being successful, but you might also want to share personal experiences that they're having in their life so that you can build a relationship with them and really understand who they are and how that relates to the connecting of your organization. It's really critical to develop solid relationships. Okay, so we got through our design thinking process. Hopefully there were some insights there that can be really helpful to you, your team, and your organization. I thought what I'd do is try to bring it all together for you so you can know really where to go from here. If you're going to take anything from this webinar, printing off any one slide or taking a few keywords, that's what I put together for you here. We talked about understanding the social values of the millennials. We spoke about understanding feedback, critical to this group. We understood that they really do like to engage with technology. We've encouraged a little bit of experimentation, really understood that they want us to invest in their training and development so they can have successful careers, and helping them feel respected and valued within your organization. There are other more simple ways to state those things. Those are the 6 words down the left side of this slide. Perhaps these are things you can share with your leadership teams or with your millennial workers themselves. I encourage you to listen, to act as a mentor, to communicate with them, to collaborate, to support, and to encourage. Because I believe that each one of these factors uniquely and when drawn together will help you recruit and retain this group and ultimately help you deliver on the success of your organization. So in terms of ending, much like we began, I thought I would end with a why. Why does this matter? Why do we need to understand the millennial generation? Well, one parting thought for you here. Millennials are your employees, and at their staggering size, if they're not your customers already, they will be shortly. Any insight you can gain into your employees can be leveraged in terms of building out your customer base and vice versa. There's a lot of connection there. It has been an absolute pleasure sharing some time and insight with you. I really appreciate your attention. I really appreciate your focus. As an educator, I mostly appreciate the time that you're putting into employing graduates of hospitality schools as they enter careers in this really exciting, amazing industry. You can reach out to me anytime. Find me anywhere online. @thejoebaker is my handle. There's my email address as well if you'd like to reach out. I also shared with you here the references of some of the articles that I was working through, because again, as you're reflecting on this and as you're working through this webinar, there may have been something that resonated with you that you want to spend a little bit more time on there. So lots of links. There's certainly lots of insight out there. I hope that I aggregated a little bit of it for you here today.
We can now move forward into the Q&A session. Just a reminder to everyone that if you still have any questions, now is your opportunity to submit the questions into the control panel. So I'll now turn the webinar over to Joe and Jamie.
First question, Joe, is what if design thinking doesn't work? What should I do next?
That's a great question. Of course, design thinking is a really fabulous framework to work through when you're solving problems. But from an operations basis, on a day-to-day basis, sometimes problems just pop up in the moment and you have to deal with them. And of course, this is something really ultimately known as situational leadership, and that's really where your instincts come in. So I would always encourage you just to pause, evaluate exactly what's going on, and just think through some of the principles that we've discussed here so that you can ultimately end up with the best result from the challenge that's in front of you.
Thank you. The next question, millennials I've hired are very unreliable. They show up late all the time, last minute shift cancellations, etc. How do I address this and solve this problem? This is a very common thing that we hear in this industry.
Yes, absolutely. It's a common problem. And, you know, I think what's interesting here is there's a bit of a generation gap because we cannot assume that millennial workers, or any workers for that matter, really have the same framework and understanding that we do when it comes to work practices. So especially as it relates to hiring new people, I think it's really important to take the time to do some solid onboarding and be really crystal clear with expectations. And back to some of the things that we were speaking about today, feedback is of critical importance. And so if you find somebody who's showing up late or canceling shifts and that's not acceptable to you, you need to be really crystal clear right away so they can adjust their behavior.
Thank you. This one again is something we hear a lot in the industry. I keep hearing about millennials' expectations, but I am their boss. I'm the one who should have the expectations from them. How do I make this clear?
Yes, again, great question. And as I started my webinar, I always try to put presentations together starting with the why. And I think that that's really critical with this generation as well. You are their boss and you want them to contribute to the things that you're doing in your organization. So it's really important to tell them why. And this might seem silly, but spending a little bit of time at the beginning explaining to them what you need from them, explaining to them how their role contributes to the overall success of your organization will really be impactful, because ultimately then they will deliver on what you are looking for. So you do really have to spend lots of time up front, again, being really crystal clear with expectations.
Thank you. This is, you addressed this in your presentation, but if we could go a little deeper into it, what is the best way to engage millennials' love and use of technology to help my business?
Yeah, great. And so the key point here from the presentation, and ultimately that comes from the research, is the millennials' interest in engaging with technology doesn't have to be organizational systems and structures that are in place. The key here is that they're naturally comfortable with technology because it's what they grew up with. So leverage the technology that they have, leverage the technology that they use. Could just be you're asking their feedback on things that are working in the technology space, like more recent apps that are coming up, whether that's connecting your business to a broader audience base, or even themselves participating, as I was mentioning, in your social media programs. It could just be a small short-term initiative that you can control, but still gives them the ability to use their skill set and ultimately leverages their skill set to help your business. So I think, again, shared vision, shared expectations, being very clear about what it is that you're looking for, and helping them engage in that strategy in a technology environment that they are comfortable with. So once again, as it comes to a relationship with this group, spend time talking to them to understand what technology they're actually comfortable with. And then you have to think about how that can add value to your business. But I also think, just leaving with a key message here, resisting their interest in using technology in the workplace is really going to be a challenge. And so instead of resisting, try to think about the opportunity that you could have by harnessing that energy.
That's great. The next question addresses the assumptions we have of millennials. Is there proven data comparing different generations, work ethic, or productivity?
So just again, to reiterate, I think that it's really important that while we are spending time understanding the millennial group, that you don't necessarily need to label them in the workplace. That it's really important ultimately that you treat people as people, and that you're building a team that is centered around principles such as open communication and inclusion, and ultimately recognizing and leveraging each group's individual and unique group set skills.
Great, thanks. We've addressed a lot about current employees, but this question is there a best practice for hiring reliable millennials?
Another great question. Is there a best practice at reliably hiring anybody? I think what's really critical here is spending time understanding what it is that you need from your workforce. And even in the interview process, is not too early to lay out expectations. Just so you know, as you're entering this job, here are some things that we're expecting. Here are some things we're looking for. these are our hours of operation. This is exactly what we need from you to contribute as part of a team. And so again, as early as you possibly can to have open, honest dialogue is really important. But ultimately, recruiting any people to work in your organization continues to be a challenge, especially as labor shortages continue to rise. And I think what's really important ultimately is that you built into your organization a culture of training and development. So that ultimately, what you're looking for is character traits, not necessarily traditional skills and experience that have been in place when hiring in previous generations when there are lots of people looking for work.
Great, thanks. This one's hypothetical, I guess. If you owned and operated a restaurant, how would you optimize and get the most out of millennials?
Right. So first of all, I would make sure that I'm understanding who my own target market is. And I think that's still a critical piece. As an operator, you need to understand who you are serving, which segment of the market you're serving. I still think that needs to drive most of your decisions. However, recognizing that this is such an incredibly large group of the workforce, you need to be willing to be open-minded to encourage a little bit of playfulness. We talked about experimentation. We talked about giving them a little bit of the reins of some of your social media campaigns and those kinds of things. I think it's important that we let go of a little bit of control and make sure that we're open-minded to give them a chance. And quite frankly, I think that's what actually happens when it comes to generation gaps in the workplace, is a lot of that is based on assumptions, common assumptions. And again, I think it's really critical to demonstrate respect from all of your workers, but especially from this millennial group, and ask them, what can you do to help my business? How do you see this in your role feeding into what I'm trying to achieve? And I think that that's key. They need to feel like they're partners in your organization.
That's great. This is starts with a comment, I guess. I, as an owner, find that letting millennials use their phones during their shifts, they seem happier and more productive. Should I let this continue and encourage it?
Great question and great open-minded perspective. I think the answer in most of that is yes. You should encourage it and you should let them use it, but you should also think about how you can add value. So you could say, I can tell that you're really enjoying engaging with your technology there. How about liking us on Facebook? How about sending out tweets about whatever's happening in your business that specific day? How about connecting with Instagram? I think that it's really important that you are showing that you're recognizing something that they're comfortable with and having them help use that skill to leverage your business and your goals ultimately. So I think that's really key. And again, referencing something that we talked on, this is a highly connected group. So sometimes people see workers using their phones and they think that they're doing something that's not productive. They may actually be even communicating with people that they're working with right now. You think about text messages and WhatsApp groups and things that are used right now to communicate with large teams. That communication can actually be really key to your organization. So again, I would say, where possible, engage in that with them. If you have the ability to start a group, a chat group, or participate in that, and I think that that would be really key because it also shows that you're relating to your workers and helps you continue to develop that relationship.
Great. This is somewhat similar. Some of the millennial requests are very uncommon. If they don't get their way, they become less productive. Should I always relent? That is, go along to get along?
Well, you should always venture to understand. I think that that's really key. I think that you really need to try to find the time to understand exactly what's happening that's having them exhibit this behaviors. And it does seem like a lot. I get that. I understand. It does seem like a challenge. But any time you're spending understanding what's happening with your workers is going to benefit you in the long run. At the beginning of our design thinking process, we talked about empathizing. Empathizing is not just reacting to the situation that's in front of you. It's pausing just for a second and saying, what's happening in this person's life or what's happening in this work environment that's changing that behavior? And I think that that's really critical because the more you can empathize with those workers and understand what's going on, that's what opens the door to give you the opportunity to let them know then what you need from them and what your expectations are. And that open line of dialogue and communication that turns into collaboration can ultimately make sure that you're both delivering on the expectations that you have and the workers' needs are being satisfied, as are yours as an operator.
Great, thank you. Again, we're getting into a generational question. Should owners try to balance their staffs with various generations or try to only have Gen X employees or millennials, et cetera?
Again, I think that this could be very difficult to try to balance. You don't want to spend too much time looking at age groups in terms of building those teams and separating them. I think, again, it's about understanding the different strengths of each group and really spending the time to understand what those generational differences can be. I'm a big believer in the diversity of a team. And so that means different backgrounds, different perspectives, different insights. And in this case, because we're talking about generations, that it's actually the difference in the generation that when combined will give you the ability to be successful in an operation. So I think as much as possible, cross-functional teams are really good to build. And I think, again, coming back down to open lines of communication, open lines of expectation, celebrating the wins, redirecting when something isn't going your way. I think that that's really big in this because it builds trust. And at the end of the day, trust is core for the relationship to ensure that you can ultimately get shared success.
Actually, I want to ask a personal question. You've been in the industry for years, and we had a question about uncommon requests. Are there anything you can think of that would have been uncommon years past that are fairly common in the industry now?
Yeah, I think that we're seeing, especially as students are evolving into graduates in the workplace, people are asking questions about salary and pay and hours up front. I think traditionally when we think about interviewing and recruiting team members, it was always from a place where the employer had the ability to sort of lay out what they were looking for and the workers would meet those. And I think what's happening right now, and you're even seeing it with some of these really unique apps that are out there when it comes to employment in the hospitality industry, it's the workers that have the ability now to choose where they work. And that's really critical because that means that they are actually much more open to moving within organizations or bouncing around to get exactly what they're looking for. So again, I would say be courageous. Don't be afraid to have that information in front of you while you're actually conducting interviews and while you're looking for people. These are our starting pay expectations. These are our starting hour expectations. This is how I need you to contribute to the overall success of this organization. I think that that's really key. But I do know that in a lot of places, hiring managers and operators are taken aback even by the questions that people are asking them while we still have students in our building and in our environment in terms of what will the working conditions be like when I'm working for your organization. And at this point, it's a buyer's market because there are not so many workers for the number of opportunities out there. So they do have the ability now to really pick and choose. So the more clear you can be up front, I think the higher level that you'll have successful people because you're matching those expectations.
On that point, the Restaurants Canada data is showing that we can expect the labor market to shrink even more. So do you expect that those expectations of the workers will go up as they get more in demand?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that what's happening is that perhaps the purpose of why we started the webinar this way is recognizing that we have 9.5 million millennials in the workforce or in Canada and a shrinking workforce and increased productivity expectations from everybody else, is that this is going to become the most critical generation of workers in the workplace. And so that's why this is a journey that many operators have already begun. And if not, you need to begin because you need to understand who they are, because ultimately you need to understand that so that you can leverage those skills to be successful in the workplace. And if upfront clarity and expectations is really key to this group, and if they're a bit more courageous in terms of laying out their own expectations, then you as an employer ultimately need to be able to match that with your own level of transparency and expectations. And I think that that's really key. Being honest about the working conditions within your organization, depending on what business you're doing, is really important because we want to make sure that we're matching those expectations, not that we're laying out something that doesn't end up being realistic. And that's what you're seeing. People aren't as focused on job security when there are lots of job opportunities, because if it doesn't work out for them in your organization, they will go find another organization that it will work out in. So I think really upfront, clear communication and expectation is key.
Great advice, thanks. You talked a lot about feedback in your presentation. This question is, how often do millennials need feedback from management?
Right. And I think, again, as often as possible. And the key here is feedback does not have to always be glowing and positive. Feedback can be constructive as well. And I referenced a really great management theory book called The 1 Minute Manager. I would absolutely encourage people to go out and get that because that feedback really can only take 1 minute. And what you're ultimately doing is saying, these are the goals in other words, these are expectations, praising your workers when they're doing something that you want them to be doing, and redirecting them when they're not. And I think that's the key. If we all walk around as 1-minute managers and we can give on-the-spot feedback, then you don't end up in very big, complicated situations where there are a lot of expectations and needs that are unmet that turn into a lot of big problems. So open, transparent, in some cases it's sharing more than you're comfortable with, but I think that that's really key. Praising when things are going really well and giving redirection when things are facing challenges.
Oh, great. This question is a specific thing. My younger employees are consistently late for work. Can I dock their pay? And I guess going back to your previous question, should I dock their pay, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I think I think there's another topic there on employment law, whether you can dock their pay or not. And I think that that's really key, especially as changes to the Employment Standards Act through Bill 148 come out. That's really key and important. But I think that, again, it's really trying to understand the why behind the lateness. What's going on? Do they understand exactly when you need them to be at work? There's somebody that I work with who always says that being on time is really being 15 minutes early. And so if you're actually on time, you're actually late. So instilling some of those practices as early as you possibly can in your organizational culture is really key. But again, try not to react to situations. And so if you're finding an employee is constantly late, try to move beyond the emotion that comes up when you're getting frustrated or stressed or anxious. Just pause, try to have empathy, ask what's going on. And yes, quite frankly, if this is repeated behavior, then that's something that you need to deal with from a performance management perspective. But if at all possible, try to give the millennials and all of your workers really the benefit of the doubt and try to really lay out those expectations clearly so that you can have that shared success.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And that's the end of our Q&A session. And I want to thank you again for the amazing amount of time that you gave us preparing this, as well as taking these questions and giving the presentation. So thanks a lot for that. And thanks to everybody who submitted questions and tuned into our webinar. Just a reminder that in a few days you should receive an email with a link to how to access this webinar in the future. So look out for that. I also want to put a pitch in for next week. We will be having a webinar on Bill 148, which is the labor legislation recently brought in Ontario. So if you're an operator in Ontario, this will be highly helpful for you. This will go over all of the changes that have been put in now and all the changes that are coming starting April 1st and next year. So I highly encourage you to look for that. And is there an ad for it? There should be an ad for it going up on your screen right now. So if possible, tune into that. And thanks again for everybody that helped with this. And thanks again, Joe, for being here.
Thank you.